the world hasn't seen or heard much from former German Chancellor Angela Merkel since she stepped down back in 2021. Merkel was the first chancellor to do so on her own volition and on her own time schedule, and so it continues. Merkel, as planned, is preparing to release her new memoir next week. Entitled Freedom, the book recalls some of her biggest political moments. It's more than 700 pages, and they're an attempt to explain Merkel's decisions during 16 years in office and how they are still impacting Germany and Europe. In other words, this is Merkel legacy building, and you can have a part of it for only €24.99. Merkel's memoir tackles a lot of history, and it lays bare many encounters, including a famously awkward moment in 2017 during Donald Trump's first term in the White House. Merkel recalls what she describes as a typical scene when she first visited Trump in Washington, and a photo opportunity in the Oval Office where even a handshake seemed to be a step too far for the U.S. president. Just watch this.
Thank you. Handshake? Okay. Head up. Thank you, fellas. Fellas over here.
No handshake between those two. Well, my next guest has been a witness to much of Angela Merkel's time as German Chancellor. He was the Germany bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal during the Eurozone debt crisis, one of the defining moments of the early Merkel era. He is now chief Europe correspondent for Politico. I'm happy to welcome back to the program Matthew Karnitschnig. Matthew, it's good to have you with us. Let me just ask you, the way you see Angela Merkel, has it changed since she left the public stage 3 years ago?
Well, good evening, and thank you for having me. For me personally, it hasn't changed, but I think it has changed in the view of a lot of Germans who are now dealing with her legacy in ways that they didn't really anticipate, especially in terms of the war in Ukraine. Russia's all-out invasion of Ukraine is something a lot of people didn't see coming, and I think many of Merkel's critics lay some of the blame for the conflict on her doorstep because of decisions she made during her tenure, some of which she details in this new memoir.
Mm-hmm. We asked ourselves earlier today, would we as journalists bid farewell to Angela Merkel today as we did 3 years ago, knowing what we know today? I'd like for you to take a listen to a segment from this program, The Day, in late 2021. This is what at the time seemed noteworthy. Take a listen. In fact, in her 16 years as chancellor, she had no personal scandals, zero, to distract from her work. Good luck finding a president or a prime minister with that record. The world will miss Angela Merkel. Let's hope we don't end up missing the values that made so many respect her for so long. So, Matthew, 3 years ago, we found it remarkable that Merkel was not personally stained like a Boris Johnson, a Donald Trump, or a Nicolas Sarkozy. In November 2024, does that even matter?
I mean, I think personal integrity always matters, and that, you know, as you pointed out there, wasn't really a question with Merkel. Unfortunately, her decisions as chancellor were at times very problematic, and that is ultimately her legacy, even though she wasn't corrupt. And it's sort of a sad commentary on the state of global politics that, you know, we laud somebody for not being corrupt, which should be sort of standard. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's not. I think in her case, she made a lot of decisions, or didn't make a lot of decisions, about Germany, about what to do with the German economy, restructuring the German economy, for example, and that indecision, let's say, has really come home to roost in a big way. And if we take the example of Ukraine, Ukraine, for example. She talks about her decision in 2008 not to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, not to really, invite them in the way that George W. Bush, the American president at the time, wanted to. And she defends that decision. But a lot of her critics would say today that if she hadn't blocked that decision at the time, there was a crucial summit in Bucharest in 2008, as some people might remember. If she hadn't blocked that, Ukraine would have been in NATO, and the invasion that we saw of Crimea and the subsequent conflict there, culminating in the 2022 all-out invasion, wouldn't have transpired. She still stands by her decision then, arguing that it would have antagonized Vladimir Putin much earlier. But I think there are plenty of people in the West who would disagree with her on that front.
She's been criticized by some who say that this is a leader who is not willing to admit that she ever made a mistake. I mean, I know you haven't read through the entire book. I mean, it's a huge book, more than 700 pages. But the excerpts that you have read, did you get the feeling that she is unbending when it comes to admitting her own fallibility?
You definitely get the impression from reading at least the excerpts that I've seen that she's trying to justify the decisions that she made. She had a very long tenure as chancellor, obviously 16 years. It goes without saying that she will have made some mistakes. But I think especially Germans today who look closely at her record would say that she benefited from reforms, from decisions that were made by her predecessor, and from the structure of the German economy at the time. I mean, people remember that the German economy really took off during her tenure because of labor market reforms that predecessor Gerhard Schröder had made. And so she really didn't follow through in pursuing new reforms during her period in office. And as a result of that, the German economy has come basically to a standstill. It's completely stagnant at the moment. The German economy hasn't grown in 5 years. It's in its second year of recession now. And a lot of people look to her time in office and to say, because of her reluctance to really retool and modernize the German economy, the country's outlook isn't very positive.
If you go back to 2017, when Brexit was still fresh in our collective memory, Trump was still relatively new. Merkel famously said, I think it was during a campaign stop, I think it was in Bavaria, she said that the time had come for Europe to take its fate into its own hands. What did Merkel do to walk her talk there, or did she walk her talk?
Well, in fact, she did very little. And, I think that her successor, Olaf Scholz, has also not done much on that front, because at the end of the day, it's always easier to rely on the United States and on the military guarantee that the United States has provided. And I think, she kind of rhetorically tried to prepare Germany to become more autonomous, but she didn't really invest in the German military, for example, in a big way. She left that to her successor, Olaf Scholz, and, he's invested some on that front, but the reality is that it is still not enough. And he really bet in a big way on Joe Biden and on the possibility that the Democrats would remain in power in the United States. So this is sort of the legacy, some would say, of Merkel's failure to really invest more in German security, in a European security infrastructure. And of course, the other big, I would say, sort of glaring criticism of her is her actions in 2015 during the so-called refugee crisis, which is, one of the main reasons for the discord between her and Donald Trump when she left Germany's borders open to particularly Syrian refugees fleeing the civil war there. And that became a real symbol, I think, across the West for people on both sides of this debate about whether to welcome refugees or to turn them away.
Before we run out of time, Matthew, Merkel, as you're well aware, has granted very few interviews since leaving office. I mean, will this book and its 700 plus pages be enough to satisfy, the legions of reporters who want to interview Merkel? And I know she's only been out of power for 3 years, but let me ask you, Merkel's legacy, is it aging well?
I don't think it's aging well, number one. I don't think it will be enough. She's going to do a number of interviews also with international outlets, as I understand, hopefully with Deutsche Welle as well. But the reason that it is not aging well is because if you look around Europe at the moment, if you look at Germany, the rise of the far right, and as I was mentioning before, her decision on refugees, this was seen as a basically opening of the floodgates for what many people see as mass migration into Germany from the Middle East. There's been a massive backlash against that. You're seeing the rise of the Alternative for Germany party in Germany. It has completely shifted the political spectrum to the right, and she has to answer for that, and I think that will continue.
Chief Europe correspondent with Politico, Matthew Karnitschnig. Matthew, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. Appreciate you working on a Friday night. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.